Welcome back to Bottoms Up, the podcast dedicated to navigating the ins and outs of pelvic health. Today, we are diving into a topic that touches almost every new parent, but it's so often shrouded in silence, pressure, and confusion. The journey back to intimacy after childbirth. So, how do you go from survival mode back to sensuality? Our guide for this incredibly important conversation is Jo Robertson. Jo is a sex and relationship therapist, educator, and speaker who specializes in helping couples and individuals build better relationships, better sex, and better parenting. Her work, which actually has been featured on platforms like TEDx and across New Zealand media, cuts through that awkwardness in order to have some real conversations. She has a specific focus on guiding new parents through that postpartum season and tackling everything that we really want to talk about: the body image, the hormone shifts, and the sexual pain, and the feelings of just being touched out. Today, she's here to help us all move on beyond that 6-week checkup and answer our biggest questions for rebuilding connection, desire, and intimacy after our babies. So, Jo, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to join us on Bottoms Up today.
You're so welcome. I'm happy to be here.
This is really exciting. Can you tell me a little bit, about your background and how you have had some programs or classes in order to help new parents actually navigate this new season?
Absolutely. So, my background is in a few different spaces. I first up used to work in sexual trauma. And so, how do the things that happen to our bodies impact our relationships and our sex life? Then, I was also alongside that doing sex education. So, hearing from young people and talking to them about their expectations of sex. And sometimes that would come with their total misunderstanding around hormones and how that might shape their body and their desires. So, we would talk about that. I then went on and I did my master's in sex therapy, and I just loved that. I mean, I spent 3 years literally learning about sex constantly, and that was really fun and amazing. My mum actually encouraged me to do that, which was an interesting little dynamic. And then post that, through that time doing my master's, I was having my 3 boys. And so that was a really informative season around, what's really going on for women and for couples in the child rearing, often decade of their life. Given that we go through pregnancy and then we raise that child, and then we often go through pregnancy again, and then we raise that child, and it can go on and on depending on how many kids we have. So I felt really passionate about the space as I was experiencing it myself. So co-founded an antenatal business with a friend of mine. She was what we call in New Zealand a lead maternity carer or a midwife. And so she would do all of the birthing stuff and the breastfeeding stuff. And I would talk about relationships and intimacy and mental health. So I did that for many years. And then in my private practice as a sex therapist was seeing many, many couples around the postpartum season, around just the general parenting season, and what the impacts of those were on their sense of self, on their mental health, their feelings around their body, and yeah, of course, the impact of hormones and what that meant for their sex life and, pleasure and pain.
So I guess my first question to you was, how do you actually, help couples navigate that physical and emotional timeline, the readiness to return to intimacy after childbirth? Where do we start? What can we do to help them?
Absolutely. Great question. I think the first place for me to start is expectations. So, exactly what you said, people are not educated or given any information often about what's realistic or common or normal. And I put that in inverted commas because normal is a tricky word, given that we've got such a diverse range of experiences postpartum and even like with childbirth. So I think the expectations piece for me is, what is it going to be like and what can they expect from their bodies? I hear over and over again, and when I was doing the classes over and over again, people basically expecting that once they were physically recovered from childbirth, that everything would kind of go back to normal. And their normal being, what it was like usually pre-pregnancy. And for lots of people in classes, for example, that's pre-kids altogether. So they've never experienced the level of tiredness, exhaustion. They've never experienced the hormonal shifts. They don't know what it's like to have someone be dependent on you physically, like on your body, particularly if you're breastfeeding them for months and months and months and sometimes years. So they've never experienced any of that, but they're expecting to go back to a season of life where none of those things were present. And so, yeah, that's the starting point for me is debunking that. And what can we expect from the body? We can expect it to not perform in the way
Right, right.
in the way that it used to. We can't, it's like in relationships, the experience of a relationship a year in versus a first few dates is just fundamentally different, and you can never go back. That like, we need to abandon the idea of going back. And even I don't even like the concept of going back, because the depth of a relationship after a year, the depth of connection or of intimacy of the relationship after you have a baby can be so much greater than what it was initially. So why would we wanna go back? Because there's so much potential moving forward. So that, yeah, the expectations piece for me, couples pre-children, they typically would be having sex about once a week. And couples post-children, particularly in that first 1 to 2 years, are really struggling to have penetrative sex, for example, in the first 6 months. And then they're really struggling to have regular intimacy for that first 2 years. And even more struggling to actually feel it's pleasurable or really satisfying. So that is what's common. It doesn't mean the relationship is in a bad place. It's just that's commonly how the body responds to having a baby.
I treat a lot of moms actually pre and postpartum. There are moms who really, really want to have a vaginal birth and end up with, say, an emergency C section. Sometimes there's a grief within that mom who herself really wanted to have a vaginal birth, and that's trauma. A piece, that I feel as a practitioner when I see moms, they really need to be honest with themselves and heal through that, because if you don't, how can you connect with your partner and navigate the new space? I think that's something that needs to be talked about, between the two of them. And I find in my practice, it's often ignored. Have you seen that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually brings up personal memories of being that mother and having those kinds of birth experiences. I think of my first boy, he's 12 now, and I ended up with an episiotomy, and it ended like there was quite a traumatic postpartum experience. My bladder just completely lost function. I didn't have sensation for 2 years after having him. And I felt really afraid of penetrative sex after that point. And I felt anxious about the scar, and in my mind, it was going to tear. And that
Sure.
was that's a "how are you feeling" piece, because it's not rational. Like, it's
Right.
not logical. It's a feeling, it's a fear. And that was based in the trauma of the experience, and it wasn't what I expected, it wasn't what I hoped for. Really common experience to get an episiotomy, of course, and so some people, they never think about it after that point. But the feelings that I had was, now I can't really trust my body, and it's not going to respond well to any kind of physical pressure. And it took me probably a year to work through that trigger that would come up. Every time we would go to have penetrative sex, this little trigger would come up. Oh, it's gonna open, it's gonna tear. And I think that the feelings are so, so important. The feelings and attached to fears that we have to be able to talk through. And I never told anyone that out loud. And if I had have talked about it with someone, we probably wouldn't have gone a year with me feeling that fear. I would have been able to process it much more quickly and therefore recover more quickly. But yeah, so that's what comes up for me when you say that.
With my first child, I had a very traumatic birth, which was one of the reasons why I'm a pelvic health physical therapist now. I specialized all in manual therapy and orthopedic the rest of my career. I've been doing this for over 30 years, but it was the trauma that I had gone through. If somebody had listened to me, or if there was somebody out there that said, yeah, this is normal, you're going to be able to get back. And it wasn't just check the boxes of episiotomy, up, check, that looks good. Or somebody C-section, check, that looks good. Okay, you're not bleeding. Okay, you're fine. There's no swelling in your belly, everything. But they forget that emotional trauma that moms go through. And, my feeling is, with sex and connection, that's emotional. The physical happens afterwards, but you have to be able to feel safe, like you said, in your body and trust those feelings. And sometimes it's just a conversation that you can be okay not being okay, and you're healing, and this is a healing process. And that, to really be able to explain to your partner, wow, this happened, and here's where we are, and we can work through that. And that's why those antepartum classes of being able to sit down and talk about it, really how you're feeling in that situation, not just what a practitioner is seeing from you, can really make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can throw something on top there, you talked about people getting checked, their scars getting, their wounds getting checked, that they weren't having bleeding, etc. So those are all physical checks. And then there's this added layer, of course, of the emotional checks. How are you feeling? What's going on for you? Uh, what I find people expect, couples expect, and actually often medical practitioners as well, which is really surprising to me, is that as long as everything looks physically okay, that, or when they're getting manually checked, that everything feels physically okay, that then they should be able to return to a quote unquote normal sex life. But they're not taking hormones into account there. So postpartum,
Right.
the female sex hormone that's called estrogen, and I think, many people would know that, but what they often don't know is that their estrogen, plummets through the floor postpartum. And if your female sex hormone is plummeting through the floor, then that shuts down desire and libido. It often shuts down self lubrication. So sex becomes drier. And as a result, can become more painful. That's got nothing to do with physical scars. You can't see that. That's not tangible to the eye or even to the touch, but it's still what's happening in your body. So I have women come to me all the time, and couples actually, and they'll say, why don't I even want sex? Like, I literally don't want it at all. I don't even really want to be touched. And they don't understand that their body is doing a physiological process that they are not in control of. They didn't choose that. And I have to tell their partners that all the time. Like, they're not choosing a lack of libido. Their body
Right.
doesn't want to get pregnant again. And therefore, it's shutting down libido. And it's discouraging sex, essentially. So it doesn't mean you can't do it, but it does mean you need to be more intentional, more careful. You need to do more foreplay, get more good quality lube, etc. So that just the physical checks of wounds and scars just doesn't cut it in terms of the physical impact of having a baby.
Yeah, and especially when you're breastfeeding. So that estrogen stays away a lot longer, because if it elevated, then your milk would dry up. And that's the thing, your breasts become nature and nurture. You're feeding a baby. They're not for sexual pleasure at that point in time, for mom. So mom has a connection to the baby, but it's not very sexy for, your breast to be touched in a sexual way at that point in time. Like you said, the brain is like, no. Um, yeah, huh, maybe not.
Well,
But as far as as far as lubrication goes, there's actually a product that we love. It's called Reverie, with a company called Bonafide, and it is a non-hormonal vaginal insert. It's a suppository that we use every 3 days. And so what happens is there's a lot of changes physiologically that happen with the body when they don't have the estrogen. It's like you're going into, postpartum tissues, which, like you said, are drier. Well, it's got hyaluronic acid in it, and it also has coconut oil. And so the hyaluronic acid pulls the water back into the system. But what it's actually doing is it's regenerating those tissues so that you've got the increased blood flow, you've got the water content, and then a healthy tissue will slide and glide and not hurt. So I give them all to my postpartum moms and have them use the product throughout their journey, whether they're bottom feeding or breastfeeding or whenever their hormones get back to normal. And they're back to normal when they start having their normal cycles, and it gets there. But that's one of the things that will help and that couples aren't allergic to. And it's safe. Of course, it doesn't prevent against pregnancy. So be very careful of that. But it's all natural. There's also some natural supplements too that we use for arousal. And so when you have a product that you're using for arousal, that's just increasing the amount of blood flow to the area. That's not increasing your libido. You have to just, I mean, that comes with that connection, with your partner, like you said, going things slow, being intentional to use your words. But then when the blood flows there, then that increases the amount of stimulation to those tissues. So there are some things that we can help people with, which is fantastic.
That is so good. There's the piece around talking
Hmm.
with a professional and getting help and doing research and understanding your body, and then the next piece around what can we actually do. So understanding, hopefully leading to getting help and getting practical
Yes,
help. That's what you're offering, and yeah, absolutely love that. In New Zealand, where I am, you can actually get free pelvic floor physio now under government healthcare
that's
system.
amazing.
So that only got implemented last year, and you can get that support, particularly after a birth injury. So yeah, I'm really excited for the direction things are moving in, but it's been a hard road to date.
It
For many,
is.
yeah. I just, I want to, you talked about when the cycle comes back, we know that estrogen is returning and that our bodies are getting into a better place. I don't have any kind of medical input or scientific understanding for this, but just my observation as a therapist is that women really take 2 years to recover from having a baby. And, so I'm not grounding that in data, just in having talked for years and years and years with couples, day in, day out, that they really don't their libido often doesn't return, or that feeling of sexual satisfaction often doesn't return for a couple of years. And I mean, I think that the body is doing a process that we don't fully understand, and it's wanting to orient itself to connection with the baby, and it's managing connections elsewhere. And so,
Sure.
yeah, and I think you're tired and you're touched out, you used that phrase early on, which is such a good one. Uh, so I guess I want to manage people's expectations that, when their periods come back, that doesn't necessarily equate to me being like before. And often people have another baby after 2 years. And so we're really pushing that process out even further. That's not a reason not to do it. It's just to understand what's going on.
Yeah, and that sex and intimacy is going to look different, and that every couple is completely different. When you were doing the classes and you were talking, with couples, did you see trends of things they're happening to people? And the other part of the question that I have is, is it based on maybe where the couple was in their decade of life, like early 20s having babies versus 30s versus 40s, versus people being career focused? Like, does any of that matter? Or is it just human connection ends up changing based on human connection?
Actually, interestingly, nobody's asked me that question before. Thank you. That's really, yeah, a deep level of reflection there. I found that the couples who were having babies earlier, so in their 20s, that they took a much more fluid approach. So they tended to have lower expectations even. They tended to be a little bit more, yeah, just relaxed about what it was gonna look like. They tended to say things like, "Oh, well, we'll see how it goes." And,
Hey, that's great.
yeah, and so I really liked that. They didn't have as much expectation around life looking a particular way, so being able to manage a particular lifestyle. And I think maybe, this is just a maybe, those pregnancies were less often intentional and more often spontaneous. And so it wasn't, yeah, they just kind of had a more playful approach to it. Couples who had were more established in their careers, more established in their income stream, in their lifestyles, they struggled more with the idea of flexibility. They wanted to return more quickly to how life had been. I think part of that is that they were more formed in their identity. So, this is who I am and what I'm about, and this is what my life will look like. And what they probably didn't anticipate is that all of that goes up in the air. The relationship dynamics post children are fundamentally different. No matter who it is that's being the primary caregiver, and so that's the person who stays at home more often with the child or tends to take more of the mental load. Usually that's the woman, but sometimes it's not. Whoever plays that primary caregiver role, they often have no idea how much that's going to impact the relationship. That all of a sudden they're the one doing more of the work in the home. They often feel like they're serving the other person and they feel like they've abandoned maybe previous goals or roles, dreams, ambitions, etc., that they've had to put those to the side while they watch another person continue to aspire to their dreams and their goals and their ambitions while they're doing the dishes. The relationship dynamic is so, so different. And it's really confronting for your identity if you're the primary caregiver, no matter who that is. That is never expected. And that can be a lot, many, many years of processing.
What are some things that couples can do and start with so that they, they don't get too far apart in this process?
Yeah, great. So I tend to think in terms of the three T's. So time, talk, and touch. And talk being actually saying what's going on for you. So not just, oh, I've decided to introduce, potato into the into the solid diet. But I want to highlight that those things are also important to talk about. So they incorporating your partner, if you're the primary caregiver, incorporating your partner into the million micro decisions that you're making through a day can be really, really important and life giving for the relationship. But talking at more depth, how are you feeling in this new role that you're taking on? How are you feeling about being a parent, a mother, a father? How are you feeling about your body? How is your mental health doing? Do you feel isolated, connected? How is this changing your relationship with your friends, with your own parents? Really doing some intentional talking. Time is spending time together outside of just doing jobs and being a colleague in the house. So you really have transitioned into, pre-children, post-children, you've really transitioned into colleagues a lot of the time. So your teammates getting something done, you're achieving stuff, but quality time looks like having fun together. Now, what most people do is they conflate time and talk. So all of their quality time is spent talking about intense things, but play and fun is really essential to a relationship. So I'm actually a big fan of people watching their favorite show together or, doing something like Dave and I, that's my husband. We once a week would like make a creative drink. So we would have like a new interesting cocktail or have new different types of food. So doing things that aren't super intense, not like deep, deep, deep in that talking, but fun, playful, enjoyable, something you can look forward to as a treat. And then
Or a
touch.
game, maybe?
Yeah, a game, absolutely. So we just recently have started introducing games into our relationship, like card games. It's just fun. It's just a laugh, and is only 20 minutes sometimes of a week where you do something playful together. Touch, then again, people tend to think of sexual touch, and I want to pull that back into non-sexual touch. Everybody in relationships wants to feel desired, craved, wanted. They want to feel like their partner is kind of yearning for them. And that often looks like a handhold, a touch on the back as you walk past them. That often looks like an extended hug, so like 20 seconds as opposed to 2. That often looks like a slightly longer kiss in the morning when the person leaves for work or comes home. That might look like when you're watching TV together, actually touching during the show or movie as opposed to sitting on opposite ends of the couch or bed. So integrating non-sexual touch helps everyone feel wanted, craved, that the other person is enjoying closeness with them. I, as a sex therapist, I've worked with couples for many, many years now. And one thing that I hear all the time from the person who's wanting more sex versus the person who's not is they say things like, I just want to be touched. Like, I just, my skin is hungry for touch. I just want connection. I want connection no matter how it looks. I would love for them to just, touch my back as they're walking past me. And so we tend to devalue for some reason those kinds of touch in relationships, but they're even more important in the postpartum season when sexual touch is maybe a bit more challenging.
When you were working, with couples and they're having issues, with intimacy and you're working on lowering, their expectations and having the talk and having the time, um, how do you kind of set that into their world? Is there a way to kind of introduce that or a process to do that? Because it's it we always say, hey, it's a great idea, but then life starts going and then they forget. Like, how do you make it a priority for them to start their homework per se in this process?
Establishing first that they want that, and you need to want the relationship. You need to want a deeper connection. You need to want the partner, to be there in 40 years' time. That you have to be motivated to have that, and it's not going to happen accidentally. So I have couples all the time. They'll say to me, "Oh yeah, we started something. We did it for a couple of weeks, and then life just hit, and we stopped." And I say, "Yep, well, like nothing's gonna change." Like nothing at all will change if you live accidentally, but everything can change if you live intentionally, and you have to grow a muscle. So, for example, when Dave and I were first started dating, we got this really great advice that every week we should sit down and talk together. And at the time, we did Saturday morning breakfast. Every single week, we should talk about what went well in the relationship, what didn't go well that week, and what we'd like to do a little bit better for each other. And at the beginning, that felt awkward and hard. It didn't come naturally. It didn't, just it didn't just flow. It would have been really easy to plan other things during that time. But we just made a decision to make it a concrete, non-negotiable part of our relationship. And we did that for 2 years. So we did it every week,
Wow.
2 years. And then, only then, did the culture of our relationship change so much that we were able to do that kind of anytime. And we didn't need the discipline as much. So you have to build the muscle up of it feeling a little bit forced and a little bit structured in order to change the culture, the dynamic of your relationship. So people will say to me, like I'll say, what I want you to do is I want you to have a 20-second hug every single day. And it could be in the morning or it could be in the night, but every single day. And they say things like, that's going to feel awkward. Or
Yes,
seems,
yes.
yeah, or they'll say like, that seems really forced. And yes, my answer is it is. But that's living intentionally, because living accidentally, if you've turned up in my room, it means that it hasn't worked so far. So we need to pivot. We need to be disciplined and we need to be a little bit forced in order to create long-term change. So we have everyday things that we implement and then every week things. So every week would be one time when you're intentionally having fun together and one time you're intentionally talking those deeper, more reflective questions. The research shows that couples really need twice a week intentional connection in order to really thrive. Once a week is survive and do okay. If there's nothing, you're probably going to be struggling, particularly if you do nothing for many, many years at a time. So that's just what I would recommend is an everyday intentional practice and then an every week intentional practice.
It sounds fantastic, and it does sound like a lot of work, but it's
Yeah.
worth it. Sex is a difficult subject for couples to talk about, especially in a situation where you have a new baby. How do you encourage couples to communicate about their feelings without the other person feeling attacked? So, are there tools that we can help them, utilize in order to branch this topic?
Yeah. It's much people become defensive really quickly if the existing culture of the relationship is not affirming. So, how often, if you're about to approach your partner, for example, and say something like, I think we should have more sex, how often are you praising them prior to that conversation? Because if you're not praising them a lot, offering them lots of encouragement and affirmation, then yeah, it makes sense for them to get defensive because there's not a lot of cushion. Like it's not a soft landing place for you to share something you're desiring. So timing is important, but timing over a long period of time. Like, have you been praising the way that they've been parenting, their commitment to the new role that they're in? Have you been affirming them when they do the dishes or when they go to work or like, really lifting them up so they feel like you're a teammate as opposed to turning up to a conversation that's just going to feel critical? So that's my first thought. My second thought is that we tend to come to conversations that could be had with an I guess with a criticism, but also with a perceived solution to that. So we think that we've got the solution. So the beginning point is really that person is craving connection. They're craving physical connection. They're craving intimacy with their partner. And they perceive the solution to that problem being having more sex. And so they come into the conversation with, this is what I think is going to change the feeling that I'm having. One, they usually don't express the feeling that they're having. Two, they very, very rarely offer affirmation to make the other person feel loved and wanted and like you're a team player. And three, it stops being a team conversation because you're already proposing the solution. So I would come at that if I could encourage people in a particular kind of script is to say something like, "Hey, what I'm struggling with at the moment is XYZ. I can see that you're trying so hard in all these other areas, and I so appreciate that. I'm really impressed by how you're doing this, and this. I would love more physical connection with you. I think you're so attractive. I desire you. I really want to touch you, but I want to respect your boundaries or what's happening for you. What could we do? How can I help your libido? How can I help you feel more comfortable with touch? How can I help you feel like you maybe want more physical connection as well? Do you want more time out? Do you want more sleep? Like, do you want to get, you know, m- lots of women, for example, they want more time with friends. They want more time outside of the home, and that makes them feel energized. So, coming at it as a team player means like, I don't have a perceived solution. I'm going to ask you what you think. Does that make sense?
That is phenomenal. That is a complete 180 from somebody saying, "I wanna have more sex." I've heard the buzz about the love languages, there's 5 love languages, I guess? How do you feel about that? "This is not my wheelhouse. I'm gonna def defer to you on this one." Does any of that come into play or no?
I'm going to be honest and say that the languages drives me a little bit crazy. I think it's been slightly overused. It's good in terms of language, but it's not a rigid framework, and I don't believe it was ever designed to be. I think it was designed to be used as kind of like a brainstorming exercise, as opposed to I like touch, and I'll always want touch, and so you as my partner need to offer me touch because that is what I need. To be honest, a lot of the time it gets used as blackmail and as an emotional manipulation. And I'm not here for it. People often crave the thing that they don't feel they're getting. That's not a love language. That's a craving, or that's a deficit. So it drives me quite crazy when I'm working with a couple postpartum, and I can almost guarantee what they'll say about their love languages. And they'll turn up, and the primary caregiver will say, my love language is affirmation and acts of service. What they're really saying is, I want to be praised more and please do the dishes. And then what usually the working partner will say, my love language is physical touch. And what they're saying is, you're not having sex with me enough and I want to have sex more often. Makes me wild. It's not. It's not a way to get what you want. It feels like manipulation. It feels like you owe me something. This is what I need, and therefore you need to do it. So those are my initial fairly strong reactions. And
No, I think that's wonderful.
I don't think it should be used as in the postpartum season. I think we should leave it at the door when we have a baby, because everything changes at that point. And so we should just really talk about what we're craving, what we're hoping for in this new season. We should talk about it with a lot more openness, with a lot more compassion and empathy, and not I need, I want, and you should.
So time, touch, and talk. So that will help the reconnection. Try to do it 2 times a week. What am I missing? And what else irks you about what couples are seeing today versus what reality? Because this is about blowing the roof off of it and being completely raw and natural. Like we want to know.
I find that in the postpartum baby kid season, which is, really 10 to 15 years of your life, maybe longer, that our responsive people, our responsive partners, they don't tend to do super well with spontaneous, what would the word be? What is the word that I often think of? Initiation. They don't tend to do super well with that spontaneous initiation. They tend to need a little bit more mental prep, which usually looks like, they want to go for a walk, they want to see a friend, they want to go to the gym, they want to, eat good food, have a nice drink, like you said, read a book. They need to do something that's life giving before they give out. So they
Okay.
usually need plan and prep. That's the spontaneous piece is often like they'll go like, "No, like I'm not ready." Like in their mind, they're not in the zone, and I think that's totally understandable in this season of life. So it tends to be a good season to be more planned, more intentional, have maybe scheduled nights of connection and intimacy, because that's what works generally for that person. And so it might be, for example, that that afternoon that they give the kids takeaway dinner, that's more like screen time. They watch a movie so that they're more relaxed. That, if you have a cleaner, for example, that the cleaner comes that day or the day after, that that's a social day, that's not a work day. And, just things that are going to be life-giving and put you in a better mental space. So when you say the word responsibility, that's what I think of is, okay, how are you looking after yourself so that you can bring your best to your partner? And that usually requires a little bit of planning. I think
Yes.
of planned intimacy as like a birthday party. So birthday parties don't happen spontaneously, but they're fun. And nobody gets to the end of a birthday party often thinking, I wish I didn't do it. And so, a really good party as well requires a fair bit of planning and a little bit of admin. It requires some structure around it, and that tends to make it an even better experience. So, how can you ensure that your intimacy is really, really great? Is by being intentional about it, is by planning, by thinking it through. What does one person need prior in order to bring their best self? Yeah. So, and then very, very few times do you get to the end of intimacy and think, oh, I wish we hadn't done that. Like, very rarely does someone regret it, unless we're talking about pain, which you have said is definitely don't have pain. It's not good for you. And there's lots that we can do for you in that situation.
One thing that I love that you said was it's a day off. And a lot of times the person that is at home with the children, that's their office. So they're working all day. And then you want to kind of like, I mean, I guess some people like to have sex in the office, but it's hard to switch your brain off when you're surrounded by work. But having that connection, that scheduled, intentional, intimate connection, Tuesday at 5, that's not your work day. Like you said, planning for that birthday party. Like you're excited about connecting with your partner that night. Or what are you going to have to eat? Or where are you guys going to go? And just shifting the environment and then shifting what's happening internally with your system. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And for the partner, for example, so for my husband, Dave, he knows that in the lead up to that, he needs to really turn up to the household. Like, he needs to really, keep the environment cleaner, and so I'm more relaxed, just as an example. Or that's definitely the night, like, he's gonna cook, and he's gonna make me a drink, and he's gonna make me feel treasured and celebrated. And so it's not just personal responsibility, but it's how can I help my partner if they're the responsive person or they're the one who works inside the home. And like you said, this is the office space. So what can I do to really make this as easy for them as possible? And so, yeah, I guess, how can I praise their body a lot in that day because they might be in a season of feeling more insecure? What can I do them feel comfortable? I would, for example, like Dave might say, "Hey, I want you to go out and go for a good long walk, and I'm going to put the kids to bed. Like, you get time off now." Because then he might know that I'm going to return in a much better headspace, not feeling like I just yelled for 60 minutes straight. So, what is the gift that we can give as partners to just make life a little bit easier for the other person?
I think that's amazing. Are there any like last takeaways that you would like to tell couples?
Oh, well, I have an online course.
Oh,
I
good. Okay.
so I have a postpartum sex course, and it's designed for you to do with your partner to understand what we call the biopsychosocial model of intimacy or sex. So, what's happening in the body, what's happening in the mind, and what's happening in the relationship and the world around you. And then, what are some tips and strategies you can do to change things up? So, if you want to do that, then you can just jump onto my website, jorobertson.org, and that's the postpartum course.
How long does it usually take?
Well, I think it's about 12 modules and they're anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes each. So I recommend couples just do one a week over that 3-month period. And it's that intentional use of their time. And then they can spark conversation as a result. We cover, birth trauma, being touched out. My breasts feel like workstation. We cover all of that stuff. The difference in identity, the difference in roles. Yeah, so it's all in there and you can do it just at your own pace.
That is fantastic. I am so excited. And I really, really appreciate everything that you have given to us today. Thank you,
You're
Joe.